further ado, here's the PowerPoint here. So you can see presented by Leeds Employment Services from London, Ontario, and we're in the youth counties, or the counties rather, with the youth program. So I'm not sure how many of you guys have a resume right now that you have current, up to date, or a cover letter, or kind of like a general cover letter that you have that you use for different job applications. But that's usually a good idea to have too. So keep that stuff up to date. And so to start, I want to talk about why create the best resume. Well, I think it's all about showcasing the talents that you have and the experience that you can bring to employers. And really, that resume is a template for yourself throughout the interview process as well. So you can always refer back to it if an employer says, well, what about this experience? Or maybe they have a question. You can just refer back to the resume, have a mental picture of what all of your experience and qualifications are, and really just make yourself comfortable during that whole interview process. So yeah, it does make it easier to talk about your strengths during an interview. So like they say, this philosopher says, know thyself. So if you know all your skills and experiences and competencies, and we'll talk a little bit more about competencies and ways to talk to employers about your core skills and how you can bring that in the resume and in interviews as well. We'll talk a bit about that. So you want to turn that into that. You want to be really comfortable throughout the interview process, because interviews can sometimes be pretty stressful, and it helps to be prepared for any interviews when you're going in with a great resume and a great idea of what you're looking for. Okay, so there's two main different kinds of resumes that we're looking at. One is the traditional employment history-based chronological. It goes by date order. You'll see a lot of these when you Google resume examples. So this is the most popular kind of resume. It's the right resume if you have a lot of employment related experience. We'll go over that in a moment. And then we have the skills-based functional resume. So this is where you want to, the bulk of the resume is a highlight of your best skills, competencies, things that you've done in the past, maybe not employment related, but skills related, and things that you can bring to an employer. So skills-based resumes are great if you're just applying to some entry-level positions, or maybe you don't have a lot of work experience. Thirdly, there's the combination resume, which you're going to see a lot these days. People have their skills on the side, and then they have their employment experience below. So where it's basically just a combination of both of these types of resumes. So yeah, chronological, or sometimes called reverse chronological, because it goes in reverse order. If you have a lot of work history, you have some experience that's mostly aligned to the job that you're applying for, or the field, or whatever position you're looking to get, and you don't have too many lapses in between employment, you can definitely use this format. You can select the best work experiences for that resume. Let's say if you worked a lot of different places and you have like 20 or maybe 10 different small jobs that you've done, maybe just select the best 5 or best 10. It's certainly the most popular kind of resume, and it really brings attention to your work experience. Here's an example. So you can see it's a summary. You've got some skills. So this is actually a combination resume, because you see the skills at the top there, and then it goes into experience. So some components of this type of resume. You can have, of course, you want to have your name, your contact info at the very top, and then you have an objective or a summary statement. Some people like to have an objective statement for every job they're applying for. So you can customize your objective statement, and it doesn't have to be super long, just like a sentence or two. You know, if it's a customer service role, you want to be kind of general and say you want to find the best role and help customers and something positive about yourself. It doesn't have to be anything too fancy. And then you want to have a core skills section. I recommend that as part of a chronological resume, to have that after your objective statement. Just a couple of your main skills that you have. You're ordered, you're great with time management, teamwork, looks good. And then you have your employment or volunteering experience, as well as any education or certifications you have. So that's an important thing too. Employers are looking for certification. So if you have CPR, first aid, if you have any additional courses like, I don't know, I'm thinking of like construction related. Some people go into woodworking or metalsmithing. There's different certifications you can get for that, or like babysitting courses or anything that you think is relevant there. You feel free to add it in. Here's another example. You can see a professional summary, a skill highlight, and then some professional experience as well as the education. For my own resume, I know that I've got a lot of volunteer experience, so that's nearly a quarter of my whole resume is just volunteer experience. And that's okay to have on your resume too, I think, because it shows, yeah, maybe if you weren't working for that amount of time, you were volunteering somewhere. So, you know, you were doing something, you were volunteering. So a little bit more about functional skills-based resumes now. So you've got chronological, you've got traditional resumes, and now you have a more skills-based functional resume. So this is more to be used if you have limited work experience. You might be in school, you might be looking for your first job. If you have time between jobs, this resume is really focused on the core skills you have. So if you just Google that later, functional skills based, you'll find a lot of examples that you can base your own resumes from. Here's an example here. You'll see some education, some qualifications, and then the main focus is on those skills and the different areas in which those skills fit. And then you can see the employment history down below. So there's not, see that person doesn't have a lot of employment history, so this is why they've gone with this type of resume. I also wouldn't recommend putting references on your resume. You can put references available upon request, but an employer will usually ask you for resumes later on during the interview process. Okay, so those are the two main types of resumes that we have. Two popular types, chronological and then skills-based, and then you can combine them into that hybrid format. Next, I want to talk about some action verbs. You want to make your resume really stand out with those action verbs. Grammar, so using the proper verb pretenses, and then competencies, and some notes about references. Take a look at these action words. All of these words, if you include them, well, not all, probably not all of them, but some of them, if you include them on your resume, they're going to stand out more, because it really illustrates to an employer, instead of, you know, you just worked on the cash or you worked doing a task, you can summarize that task into what you accomplished. So you worked on a team and you successfully handled a certain amount of customers, and at the end of the week or end of the day, that type of thing. You want to focus on those overall kind of achievements that you've done in that role. So yeah, Google action words for resume building. I know there's a lot out there that you can really jazz up your resume, have some extra stuff on it. Just a quick note about verb tenses. This is like super not an exciting like thing to talk about, but the verb thing, if you're currently working at a job, you could put helping instead of helped. So past tense versus present tense. Just something to note, if you're currently working somewhere and you're applying for a job, keep that up to date, just so it looks so it looks right to the employer and the recruiting person. Okay, so let's talk about core competencies for a bit. This is one of my favorite topics in core competencies because these are things that go across all different industries, and all employers and recruiters are looking for some of these core competencies, like communication, initiative, problem solving. So for most of these competencies, you should be thinking of a story that you have or a situation that you've really demonstrated that competency. So let's say for problem solving, you know, you think of a specific issue that happened, the task that you've solved or had to do, and then the bulk of it is the action portion, which is like, what did you do? Not the team, not you and your coworker, but what did you do to fix that problem? And what result did it have? So a lot of employers in interviews these days, they will score you based on how well you can hit these competencies and demonstrate that in your story. So I always think it's a great idea to have a few different stories for each of these competencies. And trust me, it takes a while to think of, oh, what story fits right with this competency. But you can put that on your resume too. So it all comes back to the resume, because you can link that back to the interview, back to the resume. You're thinking about that. You have a mental picture of what it is. Yeah. So to illustrate things on your resume and the competencies, we use the STAR model. I recommend this. So it's situation, task, action, and result. You've probably heard this before. It's you want to start with the situation, task. The bulk of it is the action. So what did you do for that particular problem or situation to fix it? Or how did you get that initiative? Or you communicated? And how did you get that result? And I also want to note as well, it's great in the story if you're telling an employer. Let's say for, I'm trying to think of a good one here. Let's say somebody, you were talking to a customer and they really got at you. They really kind of, you were the front line customer service, and the customer is really giving you a tough time. This would be a self-control competency. So the customer is causing us to have a possible lack of self-control, but we're going to go inside and gain that self-control and sort the situation out. So it's that kind of internal thought process that you can illustrate in these competency stories that employers really want to see. They want to see you, figure out what to do, and maybe you were going both ways on it, but you found the right solution. Yeah. So just a quick note about resumes and conscientiousness, I need spell check for that word. So it's a personality trait of being careful, diligent. This is part of the big 5 personality traits. So if you include things on your resume and in your interview that allude to this, that kind of show that you're very conscientious, you're hard worker, if you run out of work, yeah, you're going to look for some more work. Employers like to see that, because conscientious people tend to be efficient, organized, have few goals, and then work really hard to reach those goals instead of disorganized and kind of all over the place. So this is a personality trait that employers are looking for. So if you can illustrate this on your resume, perfect. There's a word cloud. So orderly and just being reliable. Employers want to see that reliability on a resume too, which they'll certainly follow up with references. Okay, so just for job dates, I would recommend that if you have them to the month and the year, just as accurate as possible, because its information will usually be verified. And I have a story about this. I once worked at an employment verifications company. It was an insurance company in Toronto, and it was a third party. All we did all day was just call people's references and see what they said, write it down, and submit it to the employer. So A lot of big corporations are doing this now. So if you apply to like, you know, Apple or I don't know, just larger corporations, they're just going to outsource the employment verifications. So I heard a lot of interesting stories from references, and I now know that you should really know that your reference is going to be contacted, know a pretty good idea what they're going to say about you. Just because there were some pretty funny stories I heard, and who knows if those people got the job. So you want to have good references that really showcase and able to back up what you've put down on your resume. A good rule of thumb, if it's possible, have one work-related, one school, one personal reference, maybe a couple work-related if you can. Of course, it will depend on the job, but some employers are really looking for those personal references now too. So maybe have a good friend, you know, a teacher that you really knows you well, guidance counselor, vice principal. Now, just a quick note on job searching. You can actually add your resumes onto these websites now, like LinkedIn or Indeed, and they will send you job alerts, which is okay. I mean, you'll get some, it's like a, you know, 50-50. Some of those jobs they're sending are related to what you can apply for. So it's another way to look for jobs. Also, I recommend the Canadian Government Job Board. So the Job Bank for Ontario has a lot of stuff. Not everything is posted on like one website, so you do have to hit a lot of different websites. I don't personally use LinkedIn a lot. I don't know anyone that really does, but I know that it's a big thing for people in like maybe engineering or you know, communications. So depends on the industry or the job that you're going into. I know a lot of business classes in school really want people to make a LinkedIn profile, which is a, you know, it depends on where you want to go. So, and then some things that you hear all the time. You guys heard the hidden job market? That's a phrase I've heard a lot. I think that just means like word of mouth and going up in person and seeing help wanted signs and just kind of just getting your feet on the ground and going up to employers and trying to network. I think I've said before, like if you start volunteering somewhere, or maybe you have some part-time hours somewhere or like a relief position, that's another good way to get in the door for full-time hours, just because that way they kind of know you more and they are more comfortable with giving you more hours, perhaps the full-time permanent position if that's what you're looking for. Yeah, so I hope everyone's doing well during the summer, searching for summer jobs. If you are, keep those resumes up to date. There's a lot of information out there, and I think keeping an up-to-date resume, you know, every 6 months or so, if you just make sure it's updated, then you don't forget stuff. And about those competencies too, just the last point I'll make is those competencies. If something happens at work or maybe in your personal life and you're like, oh, that could be a great story that I could tell later that could illustrate this particular competency, like I solved a problem or I took the initiative, motivation, just write it down, just like make a quick note. And then you can tell that story later to an employer and really wow them. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for this presentation. Those two resume types, chronological and the skills-based, are kind of the big takeaways, and the competencies here. Probably the only other thing I can add here is that your resume doesn't have to be super fancy graphic design-wise. Just make it as good as you can, because a lot of employers are just using keyword searches. But yeah, so thanks for having me here today. Hopefully you got some information out of that, and appreciate it.